So both the Mets and the Blue Jays have deep pockets, and they have their eyes set on Astros center fielder and righty slugger George Springer. Now, Springer's not close to a decision yet, but he is seeking upwards of $150 million. So, Jimmy, do you think Springer is worth the $150 million?
It's really interesting. He wants a 150 million. The Mets have started at a lower number. Um, he will probably not get 150 million. Like he could get close to that. But him setting the price that high, I don't think is necessarily indicative of him actually securing that bag. That being said, I think he's a perfect fit for the Mets. They need an outfielder. And you have Brandon Nimmo out there in center, who's not a pure center fielder. George Springer is, and he can be, at least for the first couple of years of that deal. And I think that would be a really good fit. I would rather them go out, throw that money at Springer than maybe go out and say get a Bauer, because I think that's a better fit for the Mets right now. And you add George Springer to that lineup, and you take him and you look at the other prized offseason acquisition for the Mets and James McCann. If you add George Springer to the Mets lineup, James McCann's sitting 8th or 9th. And that's how good the Mets lineup could be with that one added piece. So I think he's a great fit for the Mets. I think the Blue Jays are also willing to give him that money, and I also think they want to drive up the price. I think that's a big part of it as well. Would I be surprised if they ultimately got Springer? No, I wouldn't. But I do think that the price gouging on their part is actually part of it, and I think it's smart for them.
I actually have the same opinion you do, Jimmy, about price gouging, because I think that's really what a lot of this is. I'm of the same vein as you, that I don't think 150 million, 200 million are going to be thrown around at these guys, but the Mets are probably the only team in the league that can pay that. And if they're involved, why wouldn't you, if you're a Springer or Bauer, say, I want the biggest contract I can get? Because the Mets, I'm not going to call them desperate, but they have the money to get these guys. In a market that's dying at this current moment, when there's not a lot of teams that are going to be willing to spend that, if the Mets are, might as well go out and ask for it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, Mets fans are waiting for that big splash. Who is the big player that Steve Cohen's going to get? They got McMahon, but they are really looking for something bigger here. And I think that Springer would fulfill that. I think he would be great on the team, but I do think that the 150 million is overrated for him. And I'm not sure that the Mets should pay that. He's 31, so I don't know how long. He probably wants like 5 years, 6 years, maybe. He's going to start to go downhill. He's going to decline a little bit. I'm not sure necessarily that is worth the $150 million. But I know that the Mets would be one of the only ones willing to pay that. And I think that playing in New York is just better than playing in Toronto. If he was willing to go down a little bit on his price, I think that there's a lot of intangibles that could bring Springer to the Mets over just the money.
Yeah, and I think you don't want to pay that kind of money. I think if you have to, so be it. And it's interesting, you look at the 5 years, and I think you brought up a really good point, which is that, if you sign him for 5 years and 150, you're paying the most for like the first 3 years of that deal. And it's the same logic when guys get signed for 8 years or 10 years or 12 years. Yeah, the Dodgers are paying Mookie Betts for the next 12 years, yes, but they realize at some point like there will be a attrition in his abilities to an extent. It might not be for a while because he's really good and he's really young, but you're not paying for all 12 years. You're paying for like 8 to 10 good years, and then the last couple of years of that contract, you'll figure it out. I think it's the same deal with Springer, and I think the Mets, at the end of the day, ultimately are willing to go places that I don't think any other team is going to go, with the exception of Toronto. And we've also seen that Toronto may be in on LeMahieu possibly for the Yankees as well. I feel okay if I'm a Mets fan right now. They went out, got James McCann strictly for the purposes that they could spend more money that way. That if they went out and signed McCann and not Real Muto, that they could save some money and then use that to go get other people. So, look, I think the Mets are doing a good job with the front office. I think they've hired a lot of the right people, and I trust them. And for the first time in my life, I trust the New York Mets front office. So, happy 2021.
Well, what was that championship timeline, Jimmy? It was 3 to 5 years. That's
Yes.
what Steve Cohen told you. So if you're signing George Springer to a 5-6 year contract, that's what you asked for right there. That's what you said you're going to do. So even if it costs $150 million, that's the guy that fits right in, I think, to your timeline. And so does Bauer, but costs a little bit more. I think Springer is that guy that you got to go to if you're true to your word about that timeline.
Steve Cohen's great. Love Steve Cohen. He has all of the Mets Twitter instincts, but also $15 billion, which is good.
So you're saying the second part not as important as the first? Is that first part of Twitter?
Oh, he's hilarious on Twitter. I don't know if you guys follow him, but he's very funny. And he just he tweeted out the other day. He said, "I'm gonna call Jared Porter, the GM, and see what's up." Like just out of the blue. Who does that? That's terrific. But yeah, I feel good about the Mets' direction right now. Yeah, should they be judged on whether or not they get Springer? Yeah, maybe. But they got a good front office, good people in charge. This team is not a player away from winning a title next year, but they could help that case possibly the rest of this offseason. So we'll see where it winds up going.